Welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and often when we talk about the environment, we talk about what corporations need to do to help save the environment. But what can we do on a personal level? That's what this show is all about. We're going to judge you, wag our fingers, and ask you whether or not you're living a green lifestyle. Of course, I'm kidding. We're going to have a realistic discussion about what we can do personally. And of course, there won't be any judgment here because I know I'm probably doing a thing or two wrong. First, we're going to talk about the green lifestyle. Then we're going to talk about guerrilla gardening, a recent TED Talk that's gotten a lot of positive feedback. And finally, we're going to talk about eating roadkill for dinner, whether or not that's a good idea in Montana. But before we get to all of that fun, let's meet our panelist. Eric Knutson is a self-described urban homesteader, blogger, and co-author of Making It Radical Home Ec for a Post-Consumer World. Desi Doyen is a co-host of the wildly popular and wildly syndicated Green News Report and a fixture here at TYT. And Andrea Robinson is the founder of ARC Sustainability and our go-to guest for all things environmental, sustainable, and otherwise good for the planet. Now, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Should we get to the first video?
Yes.
Let's do it. Ed Begley Jr. is the host of Living with Ed. Now, the show is, or the episode we're about to show you is old, but I'll explain to you why we're going to show it to you after we watch it. Take a look at this particular family's green lifestyle and whether or not it makes sense.
Hey!
Brad.
Hi, Ed.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. My name is Bradley Whitford, and I'm an entertainer. He's been over to my house, and I'd never been here. So I've always wanted to see this house. I've always wanted to see what it is he does.
Actually, this is the first time that we've had a celebrity come by to see our house. We'll see how it goes. I wonder what they'll think.
Ed took me on a really fascinating tour of his light fixtures.
Compact fluorescent bulbs, all fluorescent. All the light that we're getting here is from fluorescence, very energy efficient fluorescence. And come this way, I want you to see this.
And cool, right?
It's cool in here because we have good insulation, double pane windows, good insulation in the attic. Energy-saving thermostat in there. Again, all compact fluorescent bulbs, lots of recycling under there.
You know,
it just starts.
I know, and it just doesn't stop.
It just keeps going.
I know.
Go back.
Go ahead.
Go back to the great dishwasher story.
Okay. But it's a great dishwasher.
So does it not make environmental sense to ever use a dishwasher?
Any way you slice it, that uses less than doing the whole thing with the water at the sink.
Because this could lead to really dangerous.
This is a trash can, right?
That is.
Yeah.
Oh, but you
It's
have
not
to
a solar generator?
No, you have to compost it.
Oh my God.
Top, sweetie, please.
You will tell everyone about what I'm enduring here, won't you?
Yes, I will.
Please.
I will. I sort of see what Rochelle is dealing with.
There's hope. I'm not crazy.
Now, it's really fascinating to watch a video like that because even though there are some really good ideas of how you could turn your lifestyle into a green lifestyle, even the host in that case couldn't really take things that seriously, even though he considers himself an environmentalist. So, Eric, I want to start off with you because you know a lot about this particular topic. You live a very green lifestyle. And what do you think the social perception of it is? Do you think people really look down on it and think you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs?
Well, you know what's interesting about that segment is that the negative message is within it. Mm-hmm. So what I actually told people to do, the first thing they should do is get rid of their television. Because if you cut off, I'm sorry to say it, but watch this, right? But get rid of your television and you won't get that negative message coming into your house. That's the pollution, actually, is within the sort of mediascape, right? I mean, these sorts of things like keeping chickens and growing vegetables are very old practices that, you know, people all around the world do. It's only in this very refined place, this mediascape that we live in, where it's considered to be unusual. So you cut that off, and you're not going to get that message.
But how will I watch The Walking Dead?
Online.
Okay, fair enough. Of course, you can pick and choose what type of programming you want to watch. So that is an excellent point. Desi, what are your thoughts? I mean, what are you doing personally to make your lifestyle a green one?
Well, I think the point that people should be thinking about is there are things that you can do as an individual, and we're all on a spectrum, essentially. You know, so I've been working on this for a while now, so I'm gradually making changes to my habits as I learn about them, as I can afford them, as I can adopt new technologies or new ideas, or especially the old ideas. You know, like Eric was talking about, these are things that our grandparents and our great-grandparents did, you know, in the 30s, in the 40s. You know, people did these things. We had victory gardens during World War II, where people actually participated as a community, as a region, and as a nation together to create these more sustainable, sort of homegrown, DIY approaches to what you do, because there was a time during the World War II when, there was a lot of scarcity. Everything went towards the war effort. So, there are things that we can do. It's basically returning to how we used to do things as Americans. We used to be a lot more personally responsible. So, the idea of the negative messaging, I think, is something that will take some time to work through, because we came out of a very consumerist couple of decades, but I think people are starting to see that that doesn't really work anymore, and it's not that much fun.
If these practices have been around for as long as they have been, for decades, why is it that, society kind of tends to not necessarily frown on it, but criticize it so much? Like, if you do live a quote-unquote green lifestyle, you'll kind of get blown off as, oh, look at this liberal hippie, look at this whatever, consume, American consumerism, that's the heart of this country. How did we get there, and how do we move back?
I think it's a false argument. First of all, I don't love the word green, to say you live a green lifestyle. We all eat food. We all have to travel somewhere. We all, have electricity, well, in this country anyway, for the most part. So I think these are sort of false arguments that you need to live a certain lifestyle or it needs to be criticized, or who gives a shit, truthfully? Who thinks your life is green or not? At the end of the day, it saves money for a lot of people. All these things are just sort of efficiency and commonsensical sort of things to do. The idea that now this is something that's a little bit weird or hippie or out there, it's bogus. It's total bullshit. Like, people still have to live their lives, and why not do it in a way that's sustainable and financially sustainable?
Andrea makes a good point. I mean, what began it for me was simply the search for a good tasting tomato.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you have to grow it yourself,
you do.
Right?
And the molecules apparently are really great when you first pick one.
Exactly. And if you want a good tomato, you need to
grow your own,
compost,
they're
right?
amazing.
They really are.
I have to say, personal experience.
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan of tomatoes. My mom's a big gardener, and whenever she picks her tomatoes, she'll be like, "It's organic, try it, it's so good, so good," right? And I'll be like, "All right, sure," and it is. It's pretty good. But there's something to be said about eating your own organic food, and of course, we're going to do an entire segment on that in just a second. But before we get to that, Ed, I want to get some specific ideas from you for those who do want to live a green lifestyle. What do you do personally?
Well, so again, it's you do what you can do in the space that you're in, and what you like to do, right? So, our books, Making It in the Urban Homestead, are oriented for everyone, whether you're in an apartment or a house. So if you're in an apartment, I'd say ferment some vegetables that you buy at the market or the supermarket. Cook from scratch. Stop using toxic cleaning materials. These are all really, really simple things you can do. If you're lucky enough to have a yard, as we do, you can grow some vegetables, you can plant some fruit trees. Start small, don't do everything at one time, and that's the way to go. I mean, and it's driven by a love for nature and a love for good tasting food, not this sort of puritanical finger waving that, I'm sorry to bag on Ed Begley Jr., but there's a bit of that in that segment that that is not, it's not the direction that I think of this as being in.
Yeah, I don't think that really presents it in the best possible light that most people would respond to. Most average Americans who are busy people with jobs and kids and lives that are trying to just keep together. So when you can gradually make a habit shift, when you replace an incandescent light bulb, go get an LED. Most people don't realize that, light bulbs, incandescent light bulbs, waste 90% of the energy in heat. So you're spending money that you don't need to spend on that. So the idea that people are saving money, I think, is probably the best way to promote these concepts and say, hey, listen, this is for your own good. This is going to actually save you money over time.
What about some of the government regulations that are kind of, maybe force is a harsh word, but in essence it does kind of force people to conserve more energy and more water? For instance, low flow toilets. If you're buying a house in California right now, you have to make sure that there are low flow toilets. You got to make sure the water pressure in the shower isn't too strong. Do you think that the government getting involved is a good thing or a bad thing? Because anytime the government does get involved, this is my opinion, I feel like people immediately want to do the opposite. Desi, what do you think?
Well, I think that you have to have government involved, actually. Going back to the light bulbs, for example. Light bulbs were invented, Edison in 1900. They did not change substantially over 100 years. It wasn't until the government, Congress, and the president together, George Bush, actually said we need to upgrade our light bulbs. We need energy efficiency. It is cheaper to not use the energy than it is to build another billion-dollar power plant. So let's require the light bulb managers to innovate, and we'll leave the innovation up to them. We'll just set a standard. Same thing in California. Energy efficiency standards. The reason people in the rest of the country can buy an energy efficient refrigerator is because of California setting that standard.
I love it. Andrea, what do you think?
Same with fuel standards, basically. California leads the way. And so when it comes to sustainability, I think a lot of other countries are doing a lot more than we are, truthfully.
Germany.
Exactly. Australia has a carbon tax, for example. Even China has a cap and trade system.
On the biggest polluters, though, not on individuals, just on the 500 biggest polluters, refineries, coal-fired power plants, you know, the actual big industrial folks that are doing the most of the emissions, you know, that there are personal things that we can all do that make a difference.
Yeah, I think it's a three sort of pronged effect. You need government to mandate certain things because people aren't voluntarily doing these things. And it also creates economies of scale where an LED light bulb becomes cheaper to buy, or a CFL does, for example. But you need the personal sort of involvement too. Each individual, I'm a firm believer there are 7.3 billion of us here. All of us doing something matters. Even if it's turning off a light switch, if it's not getting ridiculous plastic bags or whatever it might be. One small thing a day. I say try something every day, even if it's not running the water when you wash your teeth. That kind of thing. I mean, a lot of the world doesn't even have water to wash their teeth. So let's just be respectful of just how lucky we are here, for one. And then also it takes companies doing something about it. And we have a voice in all that. What we buy is exactly a vote every single day. So all those things
is your vote.
It totally is your vote.
Yeah.
So even if you don't get to the polls, go buy something from a company that is doing something on sustainability and social responsibility.
I love when corporations take the lead on certain things. Like, for instance, Whole Foods. I don't know if this is Whole Foods nationwide, but I know that in the area that I live in Los Angeles, they no longer give out plastic bags. And if you want to use a paper bag, they're going to charge you 10 cents per bag. So it kind of kicked me in the ass because I got a little lazy when it came to, like, you know, bringing my own bag to the grocery store. And now I do it because they're forcing me to do it. And even though I begrudgingly did it in the beginning, I love it. And it's saving corporations money as well. So let's talk about that a little more, because I read something really, really fascinating about Walmart. Apparently Walmart kind of took the lead in becoming a green corporation. Andrea, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, in 2009 they created a sustainability index, and they were the first large company to do something like that. And they have such a large supply chain that any one decision they make in terms of that affects the sustainability downstream, I mean, in a way that no government could really do. They kind of were mind-blowing in terms of what they've done, but that's also in terms of getting a better public image. They have an image problem,
of course,
among other reasons, and sustainability is a good way to sort of get past that. It's also a good way for them to save money. It's a good way to pass that along to their consumers. Now they're selling organic, you know, vegetables in Texas at Walmart's. You know, it's another way to get people healthier. So there are win-wins throughout this entire sort of story, and I think corporations get that for the most part, but they have to figure out a lot of times where they're afraid, you know, if they want to stick their neck out there or not. In truth, most companies that have done it have made, you know, increases in their financial gains by 4 times better than just, you know, shareholder first companies. So I think it financially makes sense. They just have to make sure that they're being bold enough to go for it. And most companies are compared to most governments.
And it helps when consumers help them. Yeah. You know, that your dollar is your vote. I think most companies won't respond until consumers demand it. With organics, for example, a booming market in the United States, when people said, I want organic, I don't want to eat pesticides, thank you. And that's, I think, part of the reason why Walmart got into the game, because they realized there's a lot of money to be made here.
Yeah, they're no dummies, they know how to make money.
Yeah, and companies won't do it unless you demand it, unless you buy it. So if you buy it, then they say, oh, this sells, let me use that.
Basically what I want to ask you is about whether or not this is really going to make a difference. When we have corporations, when we have oil refineries, when we have, you know, this like denial of how important it is to invest in solar and wind, do you think that personal responsibility is going to make that much of a difference?
Well, so I'm a bit of a stoic on this issue. I mean, you know, there are these big issues, there's corporations, there's the government, but we as individuals can only have a limited effect on those. So we have to do what we can do. And I would rather people focus on those things that they can change. So, and that is at the personal level, but it's also at the neighborhood and the community level. The act of getting your neighbors together just for a party is revolutionary in this country, unfortunately, but that's a first step. building those connections, building community connections, planting a community garden, doing what we'll see Ron do later on and plant a parkway garden. These are amazing, life-changing, transforming things that individuals can do. And personally, I don't worry about the big stuff. I don't even watch the news, the national news. I just pay attention.
You watch the Young Turks, though, right?
Well, of course I watch the Young Turks.
Great, okay. Wait, what's the Young Turks again?
Indeed.
Well, great points. And I think that the message to really take away from this segment is you don't have to do anything revolutionary. You don't have to go get solar panels. If you can't afford the double pane windows in your house, you don't necessarily have to do that either. If you can make the small changes, if you can afford the small changes, you're already doing a significant service to the green movement, and I love that. Anyway, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about guerrilla gardening and whether or not it makes sense. Stick around.
Fast food, vacant lots. Just like 26.5 million other Americans, I live in a food desert. South Central Los Angeles, home of the drive-through and the drive-by. How would you feel if you had no access to healthy food? If every time you walk out your door, you see the ill effects that the present food system have on your neighborhood? Food is the problem, and food is the solution. Plus, I got tired of driving 45 minutes round trip to get an apple that wasn't impregnated with pesticides. So what I did, I planted a food forest in front of my house. It's on a strip of land that we call a parkway. It's like 150 feet by like 10 feet. The thing is, it's owned by the city, but you have to maintain it. So I'm like, cool. I can do whatever the hell I want. Since it's my responsibility and I got to maintain it, and this is how I decided to maintain it. LA leads the United States in vacant lots that the city actually owns. They own 26 square miles of vacant lots. That's 20 Central Parks. That's enough space to plant 725 million tomato plants. See, I'm an artist. Gardening is my graffiti. I grow my art. Just like a graffiti artist, where they beautify walls, me, I beautify lawns, parkways. I use the garden, the soil, like it's a piece of cloth. And the plants and the trees, that's my embellishment for that cloth.
That was a TED Talk by Ron Finley, and I highly suggest everyone check it out. Just Google it, you'll find it, and it's gotten hundreds of thousands of hits because he has started a revolution with something known as guerrilla gardening. Now, of course, the city came down hard on him, and you know, he decided to fight back and rebel. And Andrea, what do you think about this rebellion? I mean, do you think this is a good idea?
Well, first of all, I have a mad crush on him now. I think he's amazing. But secondarily, what about this doesn't make sense? So it's a sort of a triple win. You've got a community that grows around gardening. You've got healthy food for people and access to food where they don't really have fresh markets as easily available as in Beverly Hills, for example. And then also, it saves money. So and it's beautiful. So all of this is a win-win. The idea that any city would have an issue with this doesn't really make sense to me. But beyond all that, I grow tomatoes, for example. If I grow a tomato, I think I am amazing. You know what I mean? Like, you feel proud, you have this tomato, it's amazing, and then I don't waste that because I knew how hard it was to actually grow that individual tomato. So all of this is a win-win. I just see this as being something that'll spread like wildfire, if it isn't already in a bunch of cities.
Desi, what do you think? I mean, are there potential downsides to this?
I don't think there are, actually. There are maybe personal downsides to people who get arrested for their activism, but what brought this to me was the People's Park in Berkeley, California. That was in 1969. That was a bunch of students at Berkeley took over a lot that the university wasn't using, and they started to make it a park. And then Ronald Reagan, who was governor at the time, said, no, you're taking the property away from the university. You're depriving the university of its property rights. And he went in, just like they did with the Occupy movement, and used police officers and basically moved them all out, and a person died in the rioting that came from that.
Wow.
So this is a long time issue that has been broiling here in the United States, and I think that what he's doing is a fabulous idea. done carefully, done with some respect for what you might be getting into. But I like the idea, and I think we should continue to support that. The idea of guerrilla gardening, getting out there, and this is a positive activism, a positive subversive activism that people can take.
I may be wrong about this, but wasn't Reagan also the president who ripped off the solar panels from the White House?
Yeah, he was.
Yes,
he was.
It was like, oh, Carter put these on here? No, don't like them, they're ugly.
But, you know, but that park now exists as a park. In the end, the students won.
Yeah.
So I think over time, this is a movement that is going to be very difficult for the powers that be to fight. They'll try, but I don't think they're going to win.
I feel like the government really has a responsibility to support efforts like this, especially when you have the First Lady Michelle Obama, you know, trying to combat childhood obesity here in the United States. It's a really serious problem, and of course, food deserts are to blame. The fact that people aren't encouraged to eat fruits and vegetables, that's also a problem. And Eric, why don't you jump in a little bit and tell me what you think about, you know, getting this message and spreading it throughout the country, because right now it's happening in South Los Angeles, but we want it to happen in other places too.
First of all, let me say I have tremendous respect for Ron. I've met him a couple of times. He's amazing. And he's exactly what I was talking about in the last segment, is rather than waiting for the government or for whatever issue, he's engaged with his community, his land, and the city of LA, actually. So my favorite part of his talk, and people should definitely watch that talk, is at the end when he says,
plant some shit, right?
Exactly.
That's my favorite part.
He says, if you want to meet with me, I'm not going to talk. You better bring a shovel because we're going to plant some shit. And that's exactly what people need to be doing. Action, not talk, like I'm talking right now, but let's get some, we should be digging right now.
And people are doing this all around the world. I mean, it's not just in South Central, there are groups in Amsterdam, there are groups in Germany, there are kids that are getting out there, you know, college age kids, people of all ages actually, who are getting out there and taking these abandoned plots, whether it's, you know, a traffic median, it's only a square foot here or there, and they're going out there in the middle of the night and they are planting and they are making these things beautiful and productive, where cities have failed.
Sorry, Ron is saying, whose neighborhood is this? This is our neighborhood.
Right.
Right?
And it's a little ridiculous that you have to maintain that land, but you have to maintain it so it doesn't grow anything other than grass, right? Why not use it for something that actually is productive?
Or it grows litter.
Or it grows litter, exactly. That's a great point. And, you know, what I love about that TED Talk is it reminds me of a personal experience, because one person in my life that loves to garden is my mom. And you know, we have a tiny bit of space in our backyard that she uses for gardening. But you know, she also used the space in front of our house, the same space that Ron used, to plant some fruit trees. And oddly enough, there were neighbors that were complaining about it because they thought that she was breaking the law. This isn't wrong. We don't like the fruit trees. I think the real issue that they had was people that weren't from the neighborhood were coming by and picking fruit from it. But even in our own backyard, if one of our trees happens to go over the wall into our neighbor's yard, the neighbor gets annoyed by it, even though the neighbors get free fruit as a result. So it's like, sometimes I get irritated. I don't know where this mentality comes from. Is it from the mainstream media that people think like, oh, we got to reject the fruits and vegetables, like we don't want these plants growing anywhere near us? What is
I think
this?
it's a disconnect in
Yes,
our culture,
I agree.
because
Yeah.
again, if you go outside of the U.S. and a lot of places, they live in agrarian societies, they grow their own food. It's a local sort of shared experience. They have farmers markets. It's not an odd experience or a sort of weekly event. It's just the way people eat. They eat locally. They grow their own stuff. They share it. And here we're so disconnected. Everything has to be packaged. Like if you look at the way a chicken is packaged and you buy it here, it's not. It doesn't look like it does in France. You see veins and blood in a chicken in France that you're buying, and it actually was alive, and you know it. Here we want to not think it was alive or packet. You know, all our food comes in plastic packaging, and we don't even associate it with a tree or something that somebody had to ship for 500 miles to get to us. We're not thinking about. Yes, we eat 3 times a day at least. Where is it coming from and what's good for me? And that's why this stuff is just such common sense. Grow your own. If you have the space and you're lucky enough, grow it.
So
That's the word. I'm sorry, it's common sense. And your mom, as an immigrant to this country, has that. This wasn't a guerrilla act for her, right? This was like, I want decent apricots, and I can't get them at the supermarket because the supermarkets are crappy here. So she grew it herself.
Yeah, absolutely. And her food is delicious. So Another question that I wanted to ask was, whether or not this is something that you guys do see spreading to other cities. Like, do you see this as civil disobedience? And are government officials really going to crack down on this at some point?
I see it as civil obedience. It's our duty as neighbors and people living in a community to work together to improve our spaces. I don't see it as a guerrilla action.
How does a corporation like Monsanto fit into all of this? Because I worry about that a little bit. I mean, they're suing farmers for using their seeds, or,
They're suing farmers who have the misfortune of having a field next to theirs. And if Monsanto stuff drifts into that farmer's, or somehow manages to get into that farmer's plot, then Monsanto sues them.
What if someone unwittingly gets their hands on seeds that are genetically modified and they happen to plant those seeds?
Well, the thing I like about guerrilla gardening is there isn't anybody to tie it to. So there wouldn't necessarily, if it's something where they don't know who it is, then they cannot attack that person or sue that person.
Well, we can't sue them, that's for sure.
Right, that's true. With the law that was just passed, the legislation that was just passed. But I think, though, that with the idea that we shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be afraid of those things. It might be impossible at this point to get a non-GMO seed to plant, if it's corn or soy or wheat that you want to plant in that traffic median, but there are plenty of other things you can plant there as well.
That's true.
There's also seed banks, like the Venice here in LA has a seed bank. So you can go and get non-Monsanto seeds that somebody grew, heirloom seeds, and grow your own. It takes a little more work and more time. But there are options to avoiding that if you want to. And I don't think anyone can tell you you can't do that in your own garden.
Oh, and we should probably, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say that there is something else we should consider and let people know that if you want to take on guerrilla gardening, if you want to grow food crops, then you might want to test the soil there. It was a discussion that we were having about how in Los Angeles, this used to be a very industrial area with lots of manufacturing, and that manufacturing, the emissions drifted onto the soil, and so there is sometimes in some areas lead contamination of the soil, and there are ways to mitigate that, but if you're going to grow food, then you want to just check that first.
All right, lots of great points. I love this guerrilla gardening movement. I really hope it takes off, and we'll see what happens in months to come. We'll definitely fill you guys in on that. But stick around, because we have one more segment left, and we're going to talk about eating roadkill for dinner, whether or not that's a good idea. Stick around.
Planning a long drive through Montana? There'll be plenty to eat along the way. Roadkill. There's a law allowing people to eat any elk, deer, antelope, or moose that is killed by a car, which is good considering you're gonna need some calories for your long walk. After what hitting a moose would do to your car. The law passed in Montana's Senate because they say they were depriving people of a food source. It's great for food banks in a state that reported picking up 7,000 carcasses in 2012. Forking down something that needed to be peeled off the pavement doesn't seem appetizing to everyone. But according to slashfood.com, roadkill can be much fresher than supermarket meat.
That's right, guys. If you're in Montana and you kill it, you can grill it. That's the new law that passed there. Just to give you some more information about the law, it actually passed by a 19-2 vote. Now, you can, eat certain animals, but if you happen to kill sheep, bobcats, or bears, you cannot collect those carcasses for food. They're actually worried that the law would give people an incentive to go out and kill these animals because, their fur, for instance, would be valuable. And also, about 7,000 carcasses were found in 2011 alone. So this is, considered food that's going to waste. And I know that a lot of people in big cities think that this has the yuck factor. But Desi, what do you think? Do you think this is a good way of, sustainable way of living, or is it gross?
Well, I don't know if you could call it a sustainable way of living, but I would say it's definitely more sustainable than what we have right now, which is our factory food system. So I have no problem with people taking necessary precautions and understanding what it is that they're doing when they pick up roadkill and butcher it and dress it and everything. But I don't see anything wrong with it. Wasting food is something that Americans are really, really good at.
Yes.
In fact, the industrial world, we're really good at that. We waste somewhere between 40 and 50% of all of the food that we have, when there are folks in other countries, obviously, who don't have that. And it just seems crazy to me to waste perfectly good food as long as it is good food. It's not something I would do unless I killed it myself or saw it killed, so I know how fresh it is, but it's not something that I have any problem with for anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate when people living in the city think it's gross, because you're right. In a lot of cases, it's actually fresher than the meat that you get at the supermarket. But the one thing that I do worry about is, what if you do happen to find a carcass, you didn't kill that animal, but you decide you're going to collect it for food? How do you test it for freshness? I'm a little worried about that. That's the only issue that I see. Andrea, what do you think?
Maybe if there's no vultures on it yet, it's good. Just guessing. No, I actually think it's interesting, but I'm wondering, does that mean this never happened before there was a law, or would people be stopped if they were doing this in Montana previously?
I guess it was illegal at first. I don't know. I don't know what the issue was before.
It's common in old practice, and if I'm not mistaken, in California, a lot of it's fed to prisoners, I believe. Like, they'll pick it up, and I think that's common in other states as well.
It's common in Alaska. They actually have a whole state law and a whole registry that they have established in order to say, okay, these people are allowed to pick up these carcasses and then butcher them. They have butchers who volunteer to come out in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning and pick up the carcass and then distribute it to food banks. And in Alaska, where they have, you know, food distribution problems, this is a big deal for people who are sustenance farmers and sustenance fishermen who have to basically live off the land because they don't have access to grocery stores. So it is well established in some other states. It makes sense that Minnesota would do this as well, and I'm glad that they put in the protections so that people don't go around trying to hit moose with their cars, so that they don't have to go through the trouble of trying to shoot one.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I definitely don't see an issue with it other than the freshness, or the question of the freshness. How would we spread, like, acceptance of this kind of idea to other states?
Well, I think the point Desi made is critical. If people knew where their supermarket meat came from, they would not eat it. I mean, a kind of farming has evolved, and a kind of animal relationship with animals that has evolved in the last 50 years with factory farming is disgusting and gross. Our ancestors would not recognize this as an acceptable practice. And so again, I want to see cameras everywhere. Like, you could see where your meat came from, and people would not eat that stuff. So I would happily eat a roadkill carcass over some
IKEA meatball with horse meat in it?
Yeah, totally.
So I mean, you would eat it, Desi. I'm guessing you would eat it as well.
Yeah, if I saw it and I had a sense of whether it was fresh and and free of parasites and stuff. But you can only tell, I guess, on a case-by-case basis.
Right, absolutely. And what do you think? Would you?
I'm on the fence. I mean, I respect anybody that wants to do it, and I don't particularly like waste. I think waste is a sort of a human, it's not real. Nothing in nature is wasted. Everything gets used. It's just the stuff that humans create that end up getting wasted, basically. So I think great. Whether or not that would be appetizing might be something to consider for me, but I'm down with whoever wants to do it.
Hey, in other countries they eat insects. Obviously our cultural prohibitions against certain types of food aren't based in reality. They're not based in any science. They're just based in culture. So
I'm a big supporter of experimenting with food and trying things that are different, especially if they're considered sustainable. So, for instance, the way that we're consuming meat right now is not a sustainable way of consuming it. And so, one thing that has been proposed is eating insects, and I think that that's a really good idea. And even though I get grossed out by insects, whatever, I would try it. If you cook it right, you saute it in the right way.
Crunchy.
Sure, why not? A little crunch, crunch, right?
Sure.
Right, exactly. But what about, going back to the discussion we had about the green lifestyle? And I know I'm jumping around, but it's a question that I often ask. Can you have a green lifestyle and still consume meat? Eric, what do you think?
Absolutely, you can, but you do need to know where it comes from, and that can be very difficult. So, especially actually in Los Angeles here, I don't know very many good sources for meat. So the only time that I eat meat is either and I do know some people who slaughter their own chickens and things like that. I'll eat that. There's a supplier of bison meat that I feel good about, but I do not. I'm basically a vegetarian unless I know where it comes from.
Where do you get your eggs and your dairy?
So I get my eggs at home. So and a lot of people can do that. It's not that hard to keep chickens. So that's a good way to know where it came from. Goat milk actually tends to be better than cow milk. And there's one supplier here that I trust, and I've known people who visited the farm, and that's where my dairy comes from.
You know, I'm on a different space on that spectrum. You know, I haven't quite gotten as far as he has, but I'm now starting, as I learn more about, you know, food issues and factory farming system that we have, I'm gradually making changes. And I think that should be probably the better focus in trying to help people understand the changes that they can make. You don't have to go to have your own chickens right away. You know, you can start on small things. Maybe don't waste quite as much food. Learn to compost. You know, it's mandatory in San Francisco now, and it seems to be working fine. The city collects the compost, they take it to farmers, and then the farmers buy it and they reuse it on their fields. And it doesn't go into a landfill because, you know, as a taxpayer, you pay for that landfill. When you run out of space, you get charged for another landfill. Anything that doesn't go to the landfill actually saves you money.
That's fascinating. So how does San Francisco enforce that law?
You know, I haven't actually looked at how they enforce it. I know that they ticket people and they do try to pay attention, so I'm guessing it's on the neighborhood level. It's on the direct person-to-person level that they actually sort of pay attention to what people are throwing away, and then they give them several warnings. I mean, they basically are trying to push people into this way to say, hey, let's save money as a city and as an individual.
And I think a lot of people are willingly going in that direction. I know that in Los Angeles, there's really this movement to eat locally grown food. There are businesses like La Tabella. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's a small farm in Topanga Canyon where these gourmet chefs grow their own food. They have their own animals, and they put together this incredible meal for people who want to make a reservation and show up. And the food is so different, and the majority of it is, you know, composed of non-meat products, so fruits, vegetables, eggs, things like that. And then the last meal is a little tiny piece of meat, but that's all you need. You know, it's not like the mindset of you need this big steak, it's American, like this is how we consume our food. So I think changing the mindset has a lot to do with it, and really focusing on what we're doing to the environment.
Reconnecting to the land, to nature, to our food. People are so separate from their food now. They buy it packaged in a grocery store and they don't really think about where it came from or how that worked. And I think that we're seeing a gradual shift, you know, in so many different areas, but that's one of them. People reconnecting to the idea of cooking.
Yep.
What a concept.
Yep. Final question, and Andrea, I want you to tackle this one. Was this a yuppie conversation? Because I always worry about that.
Completely.
You know, is this a realistic thing to talk about when our economy sucks, people are working 12-hour jobs, and they just don't have the time or the energy to think about all this?
Yeah, it is a yuppie conversation, and it is a valid one. There are lots of yuppies in this country. And at the end of the day, food is costing more and more for each one of us. For example, 50% of monarch butterflies were wiped out this year because of the monoculture in certain states and GMOs. So that's affecting food prices, for example, because things aren't getting pollinated the same way. Same with the bees. All these things are costing more to us. So in some way, I always take the financial argument. Even if you live in an apartment building, you can have a little plant. You can have a couple things. If you've got a window somewhere and you can water every day or two, great. Time is an issue for a lot of people. A lot of people don't have the time or the willingness to do it. What I think we need to get past is a fear of doing it. So if you want to dedicate time, 10 more minutes to watch another old Seinfeld episode, awesome. Or if you want to actually make yourself a meal where you're going to feel better and perhaps grow some of your own food if you can, that's even better. So these are individual choices people have to make, but we are kind of having a conversation about a spoil of riches. We really have so many choices, we've gotten totally lazy about it.
But you know, you have to start somewhere. You know, change doesn't happen because somebody tells everybody, okay, we're going to do it this way now. Yes, it's a yuppie conversation, but as we learn more, as individuals, we learn more things, we share that information, and that information gets shared because change happens person to person.
Definitely.
And yet, who's more likely to have a vegetable garden in this city? An immigrant family in East LA or yuppies in Bel Air? That's all I'll say.
Yeah, lots of great points. And remember, even though we're having a tough time getting the money out of politics and we're having a tough time getting corporations to do the right thing for our environment, we can take personal responsibility. There's no pressure, there's no judgment. Even if you do something small every day, it does make a difference. Thank you so much for watching. I want to thank our panelists, Eric Knudsen. Please tell our audience more about your book. I'm very fascinated by that.
So we're all about how-to. So we have 2 books, The Urban Homestead and Making It, and they're all about how to do all the things that we just talked about.
All right, that sounds great. Desi Doyen, our audience already knows everything there is to know about you, but for those who might be tuning in for the first time, please tell them where they can listen to your great show.
They can listen to our Green News Report, a healthy dose of politics, analysis, and lots of snark at greennews.bradblog.com.
And Andrea Robinson, it was a pleasure having you. Where can our audience learn more about you and the work that you do?
At arcsustainability.com.
All right, sounds great. And of course, special thanks to Point contributors, even though it wasn't really a contribution to our show in particular, Ed Begley Jr. And of course, Ron Finley, who did that great TED Talk. Check out the full video. It's excellent. I'm Anna Kasparian, and thank you so much for watching The Point. You can watch me Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific time on youtube.com/TYT Live. We'll see you next week.